Good morning and good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros Masterclass on unlocking the SMB opportunity, sponsored by the amazing team at Buzzboard. We've got two new speakers here with us today, and before I give them a chance to introduce themselves, and before we dive into our content here today, Umesh and Lem, we have a little bit of a tradition on Modern Sales Pros webinars. We do want the audience to get a chance to meet you, not just because you're really smart and you're going to share amazing content with us today, but also because you're real people that don't just eat, sleep, and breathe the SMB space. So Umesh, I got to ask, any new hobbies that you've picked up or skills that you've refined since the start of the pandemic?
Oh my God, it's a fun thing. Yes, I have. In fact, I've started taking pictures of the cloud patterns. So I have been taking, must be in the last 6-7 months, I must have taken over 13,000 pictures uh, almost religiously every day at different times of the day. And so it's been a fun thing when I put them together. It's really an amazing art.
Or is it the same spot in the sky every day, or is it like
Same spot in the sky? It means a couple of spots, but generally the same spot at different times of the day. And the patterns, it's amazing the kind of patterns you get to see.
Oh,
It's
that's
real
pretty
good.
awesome. That's exciting. You're gonna have to share that with the MSP community once you're done with whatever it becomes.
Yes, happy to share that.
I love it. And Lem, a longtime MSP member, but first time joining us on a panel. Any new hobbies or skills that you've picked up since the start of the pandemic here?
Sure. Well, I have to say that in context, Umesh his place has a great view of the bay. So I think you're on the 30-something floor. So you have a panoramic view of, the inlet and the bridge, the Bay Bridge and everything. So you have a beautiful opportunity to take those cloud photos. I'm down here in the South Bay in Los Altos, kind of Palo Alto. So lots of badminton with the kids and a lot more Japanese takeout.
All right.
So those are the two go-tos for us.
That's badminton. Is that the one with on the little court with or is that badminton's? No, that's not that bad. That's pickleball.
It's got a net and a kind of a long thing. We just go out and hit it. It's got a birdie, so you hit the birdie. Yeah. So it's easy to transport to go out to a local park and kind of hit it as hard as you can.
Good for social distancing. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, all right, folks. It looks like we've got our audience. Some folks are still going to roll in here. But before we jump into our content today, I just wanted to give a little bit of background on Modern Sales Pros and the community. So today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. So Umesh, if you just advance me one slide here. Thank you. And for those of you who aren't members, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. Those are folks that are in sales management, sales and revenue operations, and the related supporting disciplines. Community exists to create an environment for our members to answer the questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own. So whether we pull together amazing panelists like who we have here joining us today to talk about cracking the SMB space, or we do a small roundtable discussion on all things revenue leadership like we have next week, or really anything in between, our community exists to help our members really answer any of the questions they'd struggle to solve on their own. About 20,000 members and growing, with representation from over 6,000 companies. And for those of you who aren't members, you'll be invited to join shortly thereafter. But today's content wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship of the team at Buzzboard. So I'm going to hand it off to Buzzboard to introduce a little bit about what they do, and then we'll get a chance to meet our panelists.
Well, good. So we're based in San Francisco. Actually, I'll let Umesh. Do you want to introduce yourself first, and then I'll go?
Sure. So hi, MSP community, a long-time follower, and I love the kind of questions, the close community that is. And one of the things, I live in San Francisco, have been serving enterprises who sell to SMBs for over 20 years, so really in the SMB space for a long time. And I built a couple of companies, and all those companies are around SMB and SMB. So there's a lot of thought there, and hopefully we can share something that's useful for you.
Great. And then Lem?
Yeah, no, definitely looking forward to the conversation. I think that, I spent a long time in SMB too. Used to run small business at Yahoo back in the day, used to run sales at Angie's List. So it is an enticing segment. It is complex, great joy, but you have to kind of know where you're going, because it's always changing a little bit. So excited to share what we have, and then to learn from you guys what you guys are seeing in this segment as well.
Oh, and thank you both for sharing those introductions. And just a few things. First, we always love having longtime community members and observers join in and share their perspectives on panels. So thank you both for your time there. Just 2 housekeeping notes for our audience members. Please do use the Q&A panel for any questions that you have. Folks can upvote and downvote questions in there. So if somebody asks a really great question, great, throw a thumbs up on there. Also, the first question that's always asked, when's the recording going to be available? We'll make the recording available once Zoom is done processing. Should be in your inbox by tomorrow morning. Most likely it'll be there by this evening. But with that, I'm going to hand it off to Umesh and Lem to start to take us through a little bit of how we crack this SMB opportunity, with a little bit of background on Buzzboard as well.
Great. Well, good. So yeah, just a few words about us. We're based in San Francisco, but we have offices outside of New York. And we also have a big facility in Hyderabad, India, in the tech center there. And as Umesh said, we're all really about SMB mid-market. And we'll talk about how we segment that and how we view that. But we work with both startups and enterprise companies who are trying to reach and sell things, products and services, to small and medium-sized businesses. So we do the classic data enrichment of a CRM. We'll do persona creation, segmentation. We do a lot of leads projects. And we also do sales enablement. So when we go to the next slide, you'll just kind of see some of our partners. These are some of the folks, a handful that we work with. You'll notice a lot of companies that are really interesting, because if you ask kind of like a company like GoDaddy, they're more to the solopreneur 1 to 5 SMB set, and that's where they've built their business. But if you look at companies that we work with like Cisco or Verizon, obviously they're looking in a little bit of a larger size. So lots of companies, whether they're telco or selling HR payroll, accounting, we work with a lot of media companies. So Richard, it kind of really runs the gambit. The nice thing about SMB is it's a good horizontal, and everybody who's trying to pitch and sell them something usually needs a little help. So.
Yeah, and I think that's exciting here today. And as we think about a lot of folks in the MSP community are trying to figure out 2021 planning, should we open up a new go-to-market segment? Should we dabble in this? So this is going to be very, very helpful content. And I'm excited. I've seen it, but I'm excited for you all to share it.
Good. So just a quick kind of today, what we're going to try to cover, so we don't have to read these, but we're going to try to hopefully give you kind of more of an indication of what is an SMB, different ways to look at it, talk about the landscape, how SMBs are different by category and size, sometimes by region. And then the huge opportunity that we see, and that I think several of you probably on the call, about SMBs really buying a lot of cloud services. And they've gotten akin to data. They're in, partly because of COVID, the push into COVID, a lot of e-commerce, they're more attuned to data. And I think we both think that opens up, accelerates their pace to be acquirers of new technologies and services. So I think this is a little cartoon, kind of a thing that we got. It's a great article. I think we reference it down here. Source David Sachs from Craft Ventures. I'm sure we can send the link, but it's in Median. It was in January of this year. And this is kind of the age-old dilemma, I think. The old school would say that, you want to, focus on enterprise, They're going to have a higher ACV, more stable, less churn. And that old school would also say that SMBs are, harder to get to, maybe a little more undesirable, low size of contract. But as we see, if we go to the next slide, what we're seeing is that things have really changed. So a few things to keep in mind when you try to make that decision whether to go after the SMB mid-market segment. One is that they're really early adopters. So I think what we're seeing is that, unlike enterprise, which are usually kind of tougher, more rigid, SMBs really are faster. They're looking for new solutions. Two is sales cycle. So instead of the 6 to 9 month sales cycle of selling something, we're seeing 45 days or 30 days. Obviously, you have a clear line to decision makers. That's always a very big thing. Simpler requirements products. You don't have the issue of the data migration or compliance or the huge integration issues that you typically find in enterprise. And then it's really an underserved market, which I think is why we're talking about it here. An underserved market in terms of it doesn't have a lot of competition, but that competition is starting to be more. So likely you're not going to be on an RFP with 7 to 10 other companies. So there's a real opportunity to really kind of get traction. And lastly, it's a huge pool of potential clients, and we'll talk more about that. And Mesh will walk through that. But it's 99% of all the businesses in the U.S. And of course, that kind of rings true for the world as well. But it's so important then to really kind of get very granular and disciplined in terms of how you attack which segment of it, because it is such a large pool. So some of the questions, Richard, you had asked us to kind of put down some of the things that we often hear from people we work with. And obviously it's how to best identify SMB prospects, which ones are the right ones. So we'll try to address that. And we're happy to follow up with anyone who has questions as we go forward. The other one near and dear to our heart, my heart, is, can you reposition your existing sales staff? Do you need, are there special things to consider when you're hiring or training? And we'll talk a little bit about that. The answer is yes and no. And here's a specific one where we've done a lot of work, and I don't know how many of the folks on the call are, in a freemium model, but a lot of companies that have free users or trial users, they tend to sometimes be SMB to mid-market ones. They don't tend to give you a lot of data, or unless you really ask for it, to start the trial. And then how do you move them over to paid subscribers? So we have a lot of experience with that. It's an interesting question how you do that. And then lastly, what is the most cost-effective way to reach and get demand, to get incoming demand from the SMB segment? What are the channels where they are? And I know Mesh is going to talk a lot about that. So Richard, those are some of the questions. I know, I'm sure we'll have more throughout the webinar. We're happy to answer.
Yeah, I think this is great. And then just one more reminder for our attendees, do use the Q&A panel. These two are some of the best in the world at having some knowledge and expertise on selling to the SMB. And there's a lot of similarities between some of the conversations we've had about enterprise selling in terms of being disciplined and such. There's a lot of differences here as well. And so get your pencils ready and get ready to take some notes, but also do feel free to ask any questions that you have here. Let's jump into it, gentlemen. I'm excited.
Yeah, great. So we really think about, having worked in the space for a long time, this small business is really big business. And you'll see as we uncover using some data that why we think it's a big business. And several of you who are already selling to SMBs know that really well. But let's share some of the data that we have been able to put together. So overall, there are about 30 million SMBs in US as per Census data, and they represent 99% of all businesses. Guess what? But several of these businesses, it looks large, 30 million, but but a lot of them are paper companies. So you really need to discount and take them away. And that's where the success lies, in not in these big numbers, in how do you start taking that down and making it smaller and smaller and niche. So out of that 30 million, what we have seen, about 20 million are really discoverable. You can find them. They are real businesses that are present somewhere out there. And out of those 21.4, about 10 million or so, they are the ones who are spending money on technology or advertising or have a website. They have some kind of a digital presence, so you can connect with them digitally in some fashion or the other. Having said that, in the last 6 months, we have seen this number really growing. And I will not be surprised if this number becomes more like 14 million, 15 million over the next 8 to 12 months. So this is a big, we are hoping to see a big increase here, the businesses with digital presence. These 10 million businesses, they're spread across, or 20 million are spread across multiple sectors and over 20,000 business subcategories. I know this would be of interest, and we'll dive deeper into it as to what we mean by subcategory here. You know, it's all about, all SMBs are not equal. And I know there was a question out there, what's the definition of an SMB? And it goes right here. Don't look at the 30 million. You really need to start thinking, where do you want to play? What's the pricing of your product? So if you are selling, and we really broke it down into 4 pieces: solopreneurs, the non-employer businesses, they do work with freelancers, 1099 contractors, but that's what 80% of SMBs are all about. And most of them, 50% of them, you can't even address them because they're nowhere to be found in terms of in Google or elsewhere out there. But the very interesting ones are these very small businesses, 1 to 19 employees, and the small businesses, 20 to 99, under 100 employees, or the medium, 100 to 500. And guess what? Each one of them, they have a distinct characteristics, and they're different. They spend money differently, they behave differently, they buy differently. A common one, of course, is very small and small. They behave very similarly. So this is one segment that you should really think about considering as you go into the SMB segment, because it's about 6 million, and of which, when you look at it from an addressable perspective, it's about 5 million, give or take, is who you can really go after and connect with in some fashion or the other. Another interesting take, as we think about products, so how big is that market in SMB? 50% of the next categories that are out there is represented by 148 categories. And each of these 148 categories, we started looking at, they have at least 10,000 businesses in them. So even if you have a product very distinct for a couple of categories, I think it's a large enough market to think about. It's just one way to look at, where should I play? Another interesting, what we figured out, it's a large market collectively across 3: digital advertising, digital marketing services, and SaaS. They spend close to 170 billion every year. That's in US alone. That's really large, of which 70 billion goes into cloud itself. And it's rapidly growing too. So this is it's a substantive market. So small is really big. So the question comes, where are they spending that kind of money across all kinds of services out there, from accounting and legal to payments, to bill payments, to taxes, project management, all kinds of software and services. They're the first ones they have adopted SaaS, and they're spending money in it out there. It's just a representative view of what SMBs are actively buying. Let's take forward. Where are they? Where are they having conversation? A very interesting thing we figured out was it's no guess, but a lot of SMBs are very active on social media. And here is the interesting thing. 1 in 3 SMBs, they use at least 3 social media platforms to engage with their customers. So they are socially engaged. So about a third of them are very socially engaged with their customers. And Facebook by far is 2x the next social platform, Twitter, in terms of where SMBs are spending their time and money. So you might really want to think as you go about, where should you be spending, where should you be connecting with these SMBs? So you have to meet them where they are, and literally in Facebook. They're not, we all, in tech, we think of LinkedIn. Yes, but Facebook still rules at least the SMB segment. There's no doubt about it.
Umesh, I'm glad that you called that out. I think I get a chuckle at this every time where it's like, oh, social selling, post valuable content on LinkedIn. And it's important. It is very important for selling to a certain segment.
Right.
But some of those behaviors may be relevant on other platforms. Like here, it still just blows my mind. It's like 82% on LinkedIn. And then it's a big drop off to Twitter, YouTube, and so on.
And sorry, go ahead, Lem.
I was just going to say the other fun thing is that a lot of these SMBs, the owners or the decision makers, actually like to do some of the stuff themselves on social media in terms of how they promote their businesses, right? So they're very, they consider themselves experts on it. So it's very interesting when we do surveys and things like that. So.
And another interesting part we have seen, it's not there as part of the deck, but what we have seen, a lot of small businesses, the very small businesses, they begin their digital journey with Facebook, not with their own website. Although website is just so inexpensive to begin with, but they fire up a Facebook page and they're off to it. And before you know, they have a substantial following there. Here's another interesting thing. When you look at our over 10 million data set, there are about 28% of the SMBs are actively advertising online. And what does that mean? It's not about their advertising. It's about the proxy for budget. They have a budget. And that's what it is, that there's a substantial, and a lot of them, half of them are spending more than almost 40K a year on Google Ads alone. So if you look at the spend elsewhere on other social platforms and you start looking at it, half of the SMBs who are advertising online spend over 100K in some fashion or the other. So they have a budget. So this is a big signal as for the folks who are sales ops and demand gen. You really need to make use of this advertising as a signal for the budget. Another issue that we have seen for the folks for security products, compliance products, all kinds of things out there. Like the cyber attacks. Look at it. 43% of cyber attacks are aimed at small businesses. However, look at the funny thing here. Even the medium-sized businesses who have all the budget in the world, look at the number of folks who are not secure. When we talk about security, what do we mean? Common things like, do they have a simple SSL certificate? Are their forms secure? Do they have DDoS and other? What are the things that they have in place to take care of it? And given all the privacy laws and other compliance issues coming up, this is becoming a key area. So security is a big concern, and I'm sure only half of them have something out there.
Yeah, I'm sure every security person on the call is going like, yeah, I told you. Like, come on, what are we waiting for here? Like, yep, you're going to get the cyber attack is going to come. It's just, are you prepared?
So, and the good news is that we actually can find out exactly, for the most part, if they're running certain things, they're taking payments and have a security risk because of their website. So you can get very granular and find out, do you have a gaping hole there at your business?
And a lot of our customers, what we have seen, they use this as a way to build trust with their customers and prospects because they help them. This is becoming, hey, we want you to be secure. So it's a big trust signal in many ways. Another interesting thing, 1 in 5 SMBs are e-commerce enabled, and we are seeing a huge growth out there, the adoption level. However, the interesting thing is, while 1 in 5 are e-commerce enabled, the e-commerce adoption seems to be common between solopreneurs all the way to medium-sized businesses. So I would have imagined medium ones and small have accelerated the adoption, and they would be at a much higher level, but data shows that e-commerce adoption is the same across all types of businesses. But it is growing very rapidly in the data set that we are seeing over the last 6 months. And more companies are becoming, even if they don't accept payments online, they're getting e-commerce ready in many other ways, depending on the category and the type of businesses that they have. A lot of things. So a video platform, I know video is a big thing. We in sales and marketing, we talk a lot about video. It truly is like consumers, like 66% of the consumers, they prefer just watching a video as opposed to content. And if that is so, they're the ones who are forcing small businesses to create videos. It's really growing. And you can see the adoption in small and medium is quite substantive. Well, it was just that we wanted to give you a flavor of how we think there's a big market out there for SMBs, and depending on the product you sell, we did want to share with you a few unique characteristics of SMBs. The SMBs are different. They are not miniature versions of enterprise. We think of them, oh, big companies, let's use a process and put it into the small business. That's where we have seen failures happen time and again. They have a very unique, and we have a huge article around this topic, and it's a masterclass by itself on this topic. We love this. But think about it, while they're early technology adopters, the patience level is very limited. They really want the time to value. It needs to be quick. They want simplicity is critical, and you really need to move them. Their priorities, you need to match them where they are in terms of the priorities, because personal and professional priorities, they're pretty much common. And they have a very incremental and cautious mindset. What do you mean by is they want to see, how is it going to help me now? What is going to do for me? It's not about something, okay, let's look at it. Can it have an impact on me after 6 months, after 1 year? So you really have to think of them very differently.
And I think to put a fine point on that too, to help folks frame that a little bit, when you're selling to medium business, as Umesh and Lem were saying before, you're maybe replacing something that already exists. You're moving from the one tool to another tool that's maybe a more grown-up version of it. In some of these instances, and Umesh, correct me if I'm wrong here, this may be the first time they're buying a tool for whatever it might be. It may be the first time that they're paying for a solution, so they expect a lot more out of it more quickly. Is that a fair way to kind of think about this and get us in the right mindset?
You know what? Yes, for some, it is the first time, but for a lot, they're already spending money on tech. But you know what? They've been spoiled by Google and Facebook because their first tech is from Google or Facebook. So they're spoiled by the experiences and they expect the same from everyone.
That's great. That really makes it make sense to me. Hopefully that helps the audience as well.
So on this point, there was a question on this topic about SMB sellers. Like, what characteristics do you look for when you're hiring SMB sellers? And I think it goes to right here. So this is where you start looking for the characteristics of a SMB seller, that you really need to think of, does the sales rep, we think in terms of mindset. And there are 3 things that we look for from a mindset perspective. Do they have an entrepreneurial mindset? Second, do these reps have something called a high volume mindset? Are they able to handle volumes? Can they say no to leads very quickly rather than spending a lot of time? It's a discipline, because high volume requires a very strong sense of discipline out there. And third, what I call it's, you got to have a learner's mindset, because you're learning from one category of business, moving on to another category of business in SMB, and what can you carry from one to the other? So there is a less prep time and very quick learning time on the fly. So these three characteristics have to go in when you start defining an SMB seller. Another interesting thing, tactfully, this was strategically, and there was a question around the contact data. So yes, contact data is important, but it isn't as critical as the enterprise, because in a contact data, there's a lot. Like, let's talk from a generic email perspective. It's a very fine, minute thing, but it tells a lot about the SMB. SMBs, they want to look large. And when they want to look large, they create all these generic emails like info at, sales at, to look like a big company. But where do these emails, they're all forwarded to the decision makers. That's where the emails go. So at times, these emails are not even used by more market, as inside thing is, marketing automation platforms block these emails. So there isn't a competition out there. You can literally use them liberally. So there's a lot about the intent data. Well, intent data, how relevant it is for the SMB space, because you can find need rather than intent is what we have seen in this space again. Because they work off shared IPs, not dedicated IPs. So you can really go down the wrong track. Okay.
We've got a few questions coming in here, and folks, keep those coming. Lem and Umesh, let's maybe get through this section and then we can have some time to tackle those questions.
Sure, that would be great. Okay, so here again, these folks are spread across a lot of child categories. And why we brought this topic up is a lot of times when you think of SMB, you say, oh yeah, consultants business, we got the category in our CRM. Not really, because the way you treat an exporter's biz consultant is very different from a trademark consultant. It is so different, and it's critical to your success in the SMB segment, because you would lose them pretty quickly if you talk to a trademark consultant as if they were an exporter consultant. So it's critical to go small on the categories as well. So the theme here is, again, you really need to go small if you want to make this big business. Again, this URL is so critical for SMBs because they tell 1,000 stories about the SMB. And you really need to have, what we have seen in our past work, most companies, they have less than 25% of their records have a URL about the business. And that's a problem. That's a real problem, because it's a URL that helps you figure out what's the digital footprint, what's the need, what's the budget, what kind of technology have they adopted in the last 6 months, or have they been, are they currently using, and so on and so forth. So you really need to figure out, go back and check in your database, what's in your Salesforce. How many of your SMB records have a real URL, a working URL, a valid URL?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple questions came in here, and Lem, I'd love for you to answer Duncan's questions live as well. You put a great answer in the Q&A panel, but just to make sure everybody's got it. And Duncan was just asking, we were back on the positioning to small businesses. There's a cost savings versus business growth. How do you position that? How do you get yourself ready to have that conversation?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to realize that a lot of the small businesses or medium-sized businesses are already spending on accounting. They're spending on some kind of tech. hardware costs, payroll, HR, but they're older systems. I mean, some are even paying on check writing, right? So processing. So the nice thing is that when you look at it at a cost per instance basis, a lot of the digital solutions, the cloud solutions or products are going to be cheaper per instance. So, and I think SMBs, in working with a lot of clients where we do a lot with HR, payroll, or accounting, they know that, meaning when they reach out to SMBs or that segment, as Umesh said, the business owner, the decision maker understands the business right away. And if it's a good cost benefit argument, they quickly move forward. The other thing is that a lot of these folks are getting much more savvy around the use of data for customer outreach. So all the new solutions, right, have the ability for them to access their data and then use it for marketing purposes. So that's their expectation. So they're willing to pay for that because they know in the long run that's going to help their business.
Great points there.
So on this point, I know it's not directly related to this, but the topic of growth, we found a very interesting finding, and which is not common. We usually think that everybody wants growth and everybody loves growth. Specifically, if you are in the valley, like growth is everything for all of us. But guess what? What we figured out is a lot of SMBs, growth is not the most important thing for them. For a lot of them, it's a lifestyle business. So how you position your product for them, safety, security, stability, etc., they can become very important as well. Growth is not the biggest and the most important aspect to them. So just as something that we have uncovered in the past, and I thought it is an interesting finding.
I think that's a great point. And then I do want to hit on this other one that came in, because I think there's this maybe notion of, if I spend time with SMB, I'm missing out on these high value enterprise targets that just need what I have. Lem, again, great answer in the chat panel here, but how can folks think about the trade-offs between the two?
Well, it really depends. I think when we talked about social, and Umesh talked about it, these folks are on social, so they're responding, whether it's in Facebook or where you can be highly targeted with your message there to elicit hand raisers, because we all want hand raisers, folks that have expressed a desire for something. So we see a lot of success with a lot of our customers doing that way. The freemium option is a great way too. I mean, we work with a lot of large companies that say, do the freemium, they get a little bit of data, you can come in and enrich it and then segment those users. And then you have people who have raised their hands but haven't opened their wallet. And that's a better way to a better subset to actually spend time going after. But I mean, realize that a lot of the large companies, and we work with a lot of large companies that have outbound sales teams, inside call centers, and they're still making an ROI by selling that way as well. But I guess then it all comes down to segmenting, being really disciplined, doing that, and going after aiming small and hitting small.
That's
great transition.
Good. Great. So this is a great segue into this whole thing around the ton of questions that came around. Okay, how do I identify who should I go after in the SMB segment? So we really put together, and we'll leave you in the end with a framework of how you think about it. And that also goes into it. How much time you spend on a particular outbound or a prospect, it all begins in our head as we think with segmentation. You really need to hyper segment the base if you want to grow this into a big business. So how we think about segmentation. Typically, most segmentations so far, they rely on firmographic, number of employees, locations, revenue. Guess what? It's hard data, and you get very inaccurate data in this SMB segment. Location, anyway, COVID has rendered it immaterial. Location does not matter wherever each one of us are. how does it matter? The number of employees, interesting thing to know about SMB, they work with a lot of contractors and 1099 and freelancers and gig economy, all those kind of folks to ramp things up for them. So just relying on employees may not yield you the best segment out there. So how do you find that out? So our learning over the last several years has been that to identify high value SMB customers, you need to find out the proxy signals that help you uncover, do they have a need for your product or service? And do they have a wallet or the willingness to spend on it? And we'll talk about it. There are many ways to get there. There are a lot of proxy signals that you can use to uncover and combine these things. But then when you take these firmographics, the SMB need and the willingness to spend, it gives you a full picture out there. It really tells you a lot, because from a need signal, if you're selling an ATS product, applicant tracking system, hiring is a signal out there, or a security is a signal out there if you're selling an insurance product out there, or if you have advertising is a great spend signal, technology spend is a great spend signal. How do you combine all these things? And there are thousands of signals out there that you can combine to create that segment that's relevant for you. There are a lot of growth signals: hiring, tech adoption, security compliance, e-commerce. E-commerce is a great growth signal right now. And think about it, only 25% of the SMBs, 1 in 4, are e-commerce enabled. So,
and I would say that just to build on that, Richard, we have had increasingly, we have more engagements. Clients come to us and they say, hey, I really want to just find if these target folks are using which competitors of ours they're using. So it could be an HR payroll. It could be, we had a property management company come and say, of all the property management companies in the world or in the US, UK, there's always a link on the website, which kind of software they're using for their tenants to kind of enter stuff, or the financial, to understand payments. And whether it's us or other folks, there are ways to find out through that, through the web, through their website, to follow it, train the algorithms. So you can come up and say, if you have 4,000 to 5,000 target prospects, you can find out what kind of competing software they're using based on those sites. So it doesn't have to be a huge pool. It can be very, you can already have your lead list that you got somewhere, and then you really just want to kind of enrich it and be very, very specific. And usually you can do that, right, Amesh, through training algorithms and bots. But sometimes your ACV could be high enough, it might be worth it to also engage a little manual there. So you have both the bots, and then you kind of come back and you manually check it, and you come out with a great lead list where you know exactly the competitors that, the 4,000 or 5,000 prospects you might want to go after are using. So then it's much more targeted in terms of your sales motion.
And a lot of these signals that you see here, like ratings and reviews, content, social media, a lot of these signals you could potentially be using for your personalization. As you build your cadences and you want to personalize, instead of, hey, I wrote you an email, I want to follow up, which is what we see because of all these beautiful sales engagement softwares. How do you bring meaning to that? It's about bringing meaning to that content. And SMBs are leaving footprints everywhere. It's on you to take those footprints, turn them into meaning, and turn that into content, personalized content. And it's all possible today. Like a lot of signals around data sets, around COVID signals. Are the SMBs in an area that is very heavily impacted by COVID? Or are they in a growing category? Or are they spending money during COVID in technology? Or they're spending money in advertising during COVID? Have they taken some paycheck all kinds of, you could use all these things to really segment your customers and figure out where should you play. I want to leave you with a very interesting framework that we've been using for several years. And when we started out, it wasn't a framework, but it has now become a framework of sort. This is an example. And it's a very interesting thing how we look at it from a need and budget standpoint, because the idea is you will be successful in this segment, not because you have a 5 million records in your CRM, but having very hyper segmented records. And how do you get there? And it requires you to say no to many, many folks out there. But who should you say no to? So the framework is all about of a need and a budget. And do they have a need for your product? How do you determine the need for your product? Is via some proxy signals. And the budget is all about, it could be advertising, it could be tech adoption, it could be hiring, it could be different different signals, or it could be a combination of some of them. Whichever is a signal relevant to your product, what's a need and what's a budget signal, take them, put them into quadrant. If they have a need and they have a budget, that's the one you should be focusing on. And if they don't have a need, they don't have a budget, take them out. And you will see 60% of the SMBs usually fall here, 60 to 65% of them. So taking that bulk of it out of your database will help you focus where your attention should be. In this example, let's say security. These are folks who are already secure and the ones who are not secure. So if they're not secure and they have the money, they're spending money, 100K on digital advertising, that means they have the budget, they have the wallet to spend money, a few $1,000s for security. But yet they have not spent, their site is not secure or the digital properties are not secured. So then this is a segment you might want to go after. It's a low-hanging fruit right there for you. So I know this can get a little complex from the aspect of a short time in which I'm trying to explain it. But yes, a need and a budget, it's an old thing we have been using as part of band for I don't know how many years. But put this into the new framework and it will help you uncover where should you spend your time, money, and energy.
And Lem and Umesh know this, but I'm a complete sucker for any type of framework that fits into a 4x4 quadrant. I love them. It's very easy. It's easy to train your team on. It's easy to look at and say, should you really be spending time with that laggard, Lem? You got 400 leads that are, fence sitters or achievers or whatever. I would encourage folks to really think through the version of this that makes the most sense for your application going after SMB, because these tools are super, super helpful.
Yeah.
Well, and the nice thing, as we talked about, is that the pool is so large, right? I mean, most businesses fall into this segment depending on how you categorize it, as Umesh talked about. So you can be very disciplined in it, and then you'll still get a good pool. I mean, one example we had of a customer was they were selling Creative Cloud services, and they really wanted to know which SMBs had the most videos up on YouTube and the ones who were the most engaged, and even rating those videos. So then after you get that, then you say, okay, you're only talking to a subset of people who really, they really are using YouTube. They're really creating that content. And that's a conversation that's going to yield a lot more engagement and hopefully success than if you're just, throwing it at a dartboard.
Yeah. And the other part is that you could say you have a security product. So I'll talk about a security product here. So these folks are not secure. You might want to focus the messaging that you have. This is not just about identifying them. I would argue that this is about your messaging framework as well, because what's the message for this segment? You might be playing in two segments. With a lower cost product, this is a message to them to get them onto the security piece is very different. These folks are already secured, but they might be ready to buy your higher value products. So how you think of this is about pricing this framework. It's about your messaging, and so many things can go into how you go about it.
I feel like there's a masterclass on just using 4x4 frameworks effectively.
Yeah, maybe a workshop. This is almost a fun thing. It's a workshop. We have gone into customers and we have done amazing workshop. This is a good workshop material.
Yeah, it's solid. We'll save that. We'll save that for the next one that we do with with the Buzzboard team. No, I think it's great, man. Thanks, guys. Keep going.
Yeah. So that's where I want to leave you guys with. For every small business, address is there, but it's less important. There are a lot of other information about the SMB that's available that can inform you about them, and you should seriously think how to use that all the external information available. So Rich, I know you have a bunch of questions. We're happy to answer them, and we look forward.
We got a whole bunch here, and thank you, gentlemen, first for sharing your expertise here. Folks, do use the Q&A panel. We've got a couple in there that we've already tackled. I'll pull a couple from registration, and we'll see how this conversation progresses. And then we've got Umesh and Lloyd here or Lem, sorry, for probably about 8 more minutes. So first, both Lem and Umesh, questions. A lot of questions come up about how do I make this faster? How do I make my SMB sales cycle faster? How can I reduce the amount of cycles that I have and trying to get these folks to buy? Any way for folks to think about that, or maybe approaches that should be a little bit different?
I would argue, again, I will go back to this framework, hyper segment them with the need. Do they have a need for your product? Do you know that? Because you can't spend time on a ton of discovery with SMBs. You got to lead with it. You got to find alternatives to knowing a lot more about them. So I would go to this framework, segment your customers out, build your messaging based on that segment.
Yeah, the other thing that since we started with a lot of media companies, so we work with the largest broadcasters, radio networks, newspapers, vertical, digital pure plays, selling to SMBs. And so we have tens of thousands of sales reps use our sales enablement kind of tools that and put it right into their CRM. I think that one thing that we've seen is that if you get really laser focused around what is another SMB, whether it's a home service person or whatever, using in terms of what's the average or what's the norm in a certain category segment, SMBs care more about what their competitors are doing. And if they're becoming a laggard in the space, if they're not keeping up. So trying to tell an SMB about how to run their business, that's kind of, it's kind of like getting into an election talk, politics. But if you say, hey, I want to just share with you some information about like companies your size that do X, Y, and Z, this is what it is. Then they'll that's something that they'll spend some time on, and that resonates with them. At least that's what we hear from a lot of the folks that we deal with.
Oh, it's interesting how that's relevant in a lot of selling contexts. Oh, most folks want to do better than their competitors. So that's a good evergreen tip there. Another question that came in, and I think this is an interesting one. Any differences or nuances that you've seen in your customer base between selling to folks, SMBs in the United States, and those our friends north of the border in Canada? Any nuances there?
Well, we have quite a bit of customers in Canada and then the UK. Obviously, there are different privacy concerns, tougher concerns, as we all know, GDPR in the UK. Interestingly enough, when you have those kinds of more strict regulations, if you can show that your product or service would be of specific value to that business, then you're allowed to be more liberal in your marketing. So you don't necessarily always have to have their implicit stated intent to market, but if you can show a specific direct correlation that you add value, not just that you have a special going on, but that like they have a security problem and they could be at risk, and you have a security solution or something like that, right, Amesh? We've heard that that is kind of the golden ticket to actually go and market to them. Does that answer a little bit?
Totally. And I think it's one of those situations too, like we were talking about before, with having a very narrow group that you're targeting. Go small to go big, as we've said a few times here. One of the things too about just privacy, privacy is an individual thing. It's not an organizational thing. So it's something to keep in mind when you think about, as Umesh was saying, your marketing message and a marketing message and the way that you put on your website and the content that you put out there and the white papers that you have available, and all of those different things are to attract people that work at organizations that fit that really narrow segment. So I think that's an important part with those. At least we're not lawyers here, but I don't think yet there's a privacy regulation protecting businesses, just individuals. Oh, good. Some great questions coming in here. And I'm going to just tee this one up to you. I'll tee this one up to you live. We'll start with Matt's question here. Are you seeing companies try to move more to a self-serve or product-led growth model with smaller SMB companies to reduce that cost of sale? I know, Lem, you hit on this a little bit before, and Umesh, you hit on a little bit before, like that trial motion, but are you seeing that be maybe a bigger push from some of the companies you work with?
We are seeing that. In fact, very interestingly, like us, we were selling to enterprises, but we are now looking at SMB. And we are seeing a ton of companies that were only selling to enterprise, but now they're figuring out, how can I build a go-to-market? Because the motion is very different. The go-to-market motion is totally different. The mindset is different. The people are different. Everything is different. But they've started building, it's almost like a new startup within your startup that is only focused around the small businesses. Because the moment you start thinking about, oh, I need to go after the big guys, and now these are the little ones, the word little one can derail this whole initiative altogether. So we are seeing a lot of focus around how do you use product-led growth models to go after these SMB business quite a bit.
I think also you're seeing a lot of companies. I mean, if you looked at GoDaddy's third quarter transcript, they just reported third quarter, they are moving much more towards an e-commerce model where everything is purchased online. And remember, that's a company that is, and not just a small ACV. I mean, this is some larger dollars, larger per sales, product cost. And so that's a company that really knows the SMB space. They're going after a small segment. And Richard, to your point, they're putting almost everything online and kind of allowing kind of a more of a transaction thing. And I don't think that SMBs, depending on what types they are averse to that at all. They understand that. And in fact, the other question that came in was, after the election, or as COVID maybe eases, what's going to happen with this demand? And I think, all you have to look at today is, I think Yelp is up, their stock is up for almost 30-40%. So clearly, there's going to be more shopping. There's going to be more liquidity in the SMB space, and any pent up demand around some big purchases is going to be hopefully, eased a bit as we go forward.
And I think one last point on that product-led growth and everything that we've touched on here. Brian Halligan has a deck called like the new normal, or some very basic term like that he put out in early summertime. One of the things in that deck, it goes into the consumerization of the buying experience.
Yeah, totally.
And it's just something where it's just so free. You buy a car online now. I mean, that's crazy pants for some of us, but the world is getting more and more comfortable buying bigger and bigger ticket items online. And for folks that are in software selling, we're going to be next. Like, there's going to be a component where you can transact for some piece online. Gentlemen, we're at time. Umesh and Lem, this was really, really, really dense content, but I'm going to put an impossible task on each of you. Umesh, if you could just leave folks with one tweet length takeaway on how to crack the SMB, what would that be? Just
Go
one
small
tweet
to
length.
go small to grow big. You really need to go small in all your strategy, in just about everything, if you really want to make this, take a pie of this large opportunity.
That's great. And Lem, last but certainly not least, one piece tweet length advice for our folks.
I would say, just get the data. The data is out there. So if you're going to do it before you even invest in the go-to-market sales, you should have, I guess I've just been surprised on how lousy people's data set is in CRMs. And we work with a lot of large companies that are household names, and it's just shocking. So it's hard to really kind of figure out how to plan and have sales numbers and projections when you don't have that real kind of that foundational set of data, and especially with SMBs. And whether it's us or lots of other companies, that is where I think that's where you want to start.
That was awesome. Gentlemen, I know you're both incredibly busy. Umesh and Lem, thank you so much for taking some time to share your perspective, to answer questions here this afternoon. I know your time is valuable, and thank you for giving so much back to the MSP community. On behalf of Hannah and the team behind the scenes, the 20,000 folks that are going to be watching this asynchronously, and everybody who joined here today, thank you. And everybody, stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.